Good evening and welcome to Product Tank London. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. We're really excited for the amazing talk that we have coming up. So brief history for people who haven't been to one of our Product Tank events before. We started out in a London basement a couple of years ago, and we've since expanded to 200 cities. You can catch up with previous events on our Product Tank London YouTube. So we've got everything that's been happening over the last year. We've also got stuff from across the world. So if you want to catch up on Product Tank Buenos Aires or Berlin, all of the videos are available there. Big thanks to our sponsor, Mind the Product, the world's largest product tank, world's largest product community. There's tons of great content produced by Mind the Product that you can get there. So there's podcasts, regular newsletter, a website, and a Slack channel. There's also Mind the Product membership, which is fairly new. So through it, there are new ways for you to level up your career, build better products, and lead successful product teams. So head on over to the website to have a look at that. Really excited to announce the new product skills toolkit that has also been launched by Mind the Product. It will help you assess your product skills and take the next steps on your product learning journey. It includes PDF downloads, video tutorials, and email series. You can visit the site today using the link that you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. You can also sign up to remote training workshops that will help you level up your skills in lockdown. Everything from product management foundations to metrics for product managers, kind of everything you could want and more. So for those of you who have been to some recent Product Tanks, you'll see that we have been using Slido, and we are doing so again here. So Slido allows us to ask you a question and get some interaction there, and it also allows you to put your Q&A up there. So there's going to be a ticker on the bottom running throughout the presentations. But for now, if you go to slido.com, type in that number, and you'll have the opportunity to answer this question, which ties in nicely with the theme for today. How does your company manage internal products? So I'm going to hand over to our curator for the evening, Alexey Zanin.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Alexey Zanin, and I started my career as an entrepreneur, launching and scaling a couple of startups, and then switched to product management. And I'm now a product manager at Curated, a London fintech company. And when Sean kindly asked me to curate the event tonight, I thought a bit about what would be some interesting topics to talk about. And I think we can probably all relate to the fact that almost all the products have some parts of them that are used by the internal teams, and that in one way or another, building these parts and maintaining and managing them has its own quirks and challenges. So what we are going to talk about today is product management for internal teams, and we're going to cover several topics and some interesting points around what are the skills that are involved in managing internal products, what it takes to make them successful, and how do you define success at all. And I'm very excited about the three speakers that we have tonight: Eddie Hickson, Joao Carpiero, and John Woods. We're going to have three amazing talks and a short Q&A session after them. But you don't have to wait until the Q&A session to post your questions. Just drop them on Slido or in the YouTube chat, and we'll try to keep an eye on them. And when we come to an end, we'll have a Q&A session. And without any further ado, let me introduce to Ali. Ali is a group product manager for the platform group at Curated. She has experience in B2C, B2B, and internal product management, and has worked across a range of industries in Australia and the UK, in global corporates, startups, and scale-ups. Ali is having most fun when she's performing research to create a product strategy and when she's collaborating with her teams to deliver their strategic goals. Tonight with us, she's going to be talking about sharpening your product craft as an internal product manager. I wish I could ask you to give a big hand to Ali, but obviously you can't do it because we're doing it virtually. But feel free to drop virtual hands in the comment stream. Just give him a warm Product Tank welcome to Ali.
Hello, thank you, Alexey. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. So when Alexey asked me to present at Product Tank about internal product management, it got me thinking about my origin story, I guess, as an internal product manager, because like many of you all, I started my career in product management working on externally facing products, things like, websites, APIs, apps, dashboards. And when you're working on those products, your customers are external, and the reach that you have for those products is essentially limited only really by your company's global reach. How successful your go-to-market strategy has been, and I suppose like how well your product is doing in meeting customer needs or not. And so then when I became an internal product manager, when I started at Go Cardless, I realized that my reach was kind of going from those thousands to more like hundreds, which was made up of the teams that I was going to be supporting. And that was essentially limited, the growth of those users was limited by the investment by the company I was working at. So that was kind of an initial shock for me that maybe some of you have had as well. The second thing that I realized was around product recognition. So what I mean by this is, like, if you think about a well-known product, let's avoid digital for now and let's go with something like the Titanic. So the Titanic obviously wasn't a great product in the end, but when you think of the Titanic, you're thinking of something along the lines of the boat above the water, the tall mast, the big deck, or maybe you're thinking of the internal staircase and all of the internals there. What you're not thinking of, though, which is what I was moving into, I saw, was the below the deck engine room, the less sexy stuff, and the stuff that you don't really think about when you think about products. And so that really gave me pause for thought. It made me stop and think, okay, is internal product management where I want to go, and is it going to enable me to achieve the goals that I have in my product management career? And so I stopped and actually thought about what my goals were, and I came up with 3 goals, which I'm going to take you through now. And as I do that, I want you to have a think maybe about the goals that you have as a product manager, and maybe take some time to reflect tonight on how your current role is helping you to achieve those goals, or maybe not. So my first goal was to be the expert in my problem space. So for me, this was about building an intimate understanding of the problems we could solve for a particular area, for who and which ones we should solve in what order. And I really wanted to be that go-to person who was able to talk articulately about the problem space. The second one was to be able to influence without authority. We have to do this every day as a product manager, and I wanted to get really good at this. So for me, this was about taking an ambiguous product area, creating a strategic story around that, and getting my stakeholders and my teams to really be excited to push that strategy and make that a reality. And then the third goal that I had was around growing products with little bets. So I'd been in a few roles previously where you do a whole bunch of problem analysis and you figure out which problem you're going to solve, and then there's this expectation on the product manager to just launch the solution and kind of to know what you need to do to solve the problem without any kind of testing and learning. And so those were the 3 goals that I had. And spoiler alert, what I actually found was that in being an internal product manager, not only enabled me to achieve those 3 goals, but arguably to achieve them faster than I would have if I had remained in that external product management space. And so tonight, I want to take you through some tips for how to make the most of those internal product management roles, and also some things to avoid in order to be successful. So let's kick off. So the first one, around being the expert in your problem space. Something that I think we forget as product managers, particularly when you're working on externally facing products, is how hard it can be to get access to your users. You read all these wonderful articles and you watch these great videos around user research, but it can be really hard to work with your account execs, or whether it be the sales team, to actually be able to sit down with the users and interview them, or kind of take them through some kind of a research cycle. But the great thing about internal product management is that your users are on your team. They're a Slack message away. You know exactly who they are. So this was something that I really made the most of in being an internal product manager, in refining, and sorry for this terrible image, but refining my customer research skills. So there's so much stuff you can do. You can do shadowing, interviews, card sorting, usability testing. And as an internal product manager, the stakes are lower. So you can test out what works for you and what gives you the best insights, obviously always having objectives of your research and a clear research plan. But that setup does help you to build that expertise in the problem area. And it also sets you up really well for success in your future career, whether that be in internal or external product management. So that's a first point there. The second thing I wanted to point out when you're thinking about being an expert in your problem area is that captive users as an internal product manager is really a fallacy. I was often told when I first became a product manager that your users are captive and that don't worry about usability because they have to use your product anyway. This is false. I've seen firsthand users can choose just to flat out not use your product. They can choose to create hacky workarounds, or they can be clever and get your team to do their job for them. So a few key points here to make sure that you avoid this captive user trap. The first is to shadow. Take advantage of the fact that your users are on your team and actually sit with them and shadow their experience, so you can get a first-hand view of how the current state situation works. The second one I really recommend is to monitor adoption rates. So with externally facing products, you usually have access to Google Analytics, where you can just hook that in and you've got your adoption rates then and there. Whereas with internally facing ones, it's often harder to get Google Analytics hooked in, if at all. But there is always something that you can track. You can use logs, or you can get clever with your metrics. So I really recommend getting those tracked up front so that you have some data to work with as you iterate your product. And then the third key point around this is to remember to monitor things like Slack. So monitor your team Slack channel. It's a gold mine for customer feedback. Your customers or your users are never going to actually say, here is some feedback, but they'll be asking questions or saying something doesn't work, or something's buggy, and that's stuff to monitor really closely so that you can iterate your product for these users and make sure that those adoption rates continue to go up and to the right. So they are some key points around becoming the expert in your problem space. And now I want to move into talking about influencing without authority. So something that's hit home a lot for me with regards to particularly stakeholders as an internal product manager is that because they have a lot of access to you, and because your users are internal and your stakeholders also know your users, they have a lot more I suppose say in what they want. And we've all been in situations before where you're in a stakeholder meeting and they're essentially just telling you to read the standing orders, and and we'll all walk out of this meeting happy. And sometimes you cave, sometimes you just make promises that you probably shouldn't. But we all know that that's not the best thing for your users. And so I've got a few recommendations for how to essentially build social capital with your stakeholders as an internal product manager. The first is really basic, which is essentially just to identify representatives for each of your user groups. As an internal PM, it's likely that you'll have multiple user groups that you're enabling because of scalability considerations. And so, find representatives for each of those user groups, bring them into the tent, and work with them closely on things like understanding the problem space, as well as like planning discussions and prioritization discussions. The second point, which you read everywhere, is empathize, don't make promises. What I find is that people actually just want to be listened to more so than you actually delivering a solution. And so if you can use techniques like playing things back to your stakeholders. So, saying things like, if I've understood you correctly, it sounds like the pain points you're describing are X, Y, Z, and they're leading to a decrease in quality or an increase in time to deliver, or, an increase in cost. And as soon as you start to hear things like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about, you're on the right track with your stakeholder. So keep up those kinds of conversations and you'll see that social capital build. And then the third part of this stakeholder relationship as an internal PM is around creating aligned measures of success that everyone's aware of, that everyone had a chance to debate around, so that when you're talking about things like impact or what you're trying to achieve, you're all talking about the same thing. So what I often do is go away after a number of these stakeholder sessions, draft out a few options, measures of success with some back of the envelope type sizing, and then bring that back to my key representatives to discuss and debate which measure we're going to go for first and why. And that saves you a lot of pain and a lot of those standing order conversations, because everyone's bought into the aligned direction that you're trying to head in. And then, so that's influencing without authority, a few tips there. And then the last piece that I had was around growing products with little bets. So, we all just want to avoid the Homer car, which is essentially where you've done some great analysis around the problem to solve. And then someone says to you, okay, product manager, go deliver the solution. And, you create this thing, and then everyone, you present it, and there's this like shocked gasp in a negative way around, well, what is this? What's happened? I guess it like solves the problem in theory, but is it usable? No, not really. So this is where this release little bets iteratively comes in. And if you haven't read this book, Little Bets by Peter Sims, I really recommend it. It's kind of changes the way that you think about product management largely. So the first point under this, as an internal product manager, take advantage of the lower stakes releases. So with internal products, you don't need a detailed marketing or go-to-market launch. And there's likely to be very little external brand damage if your iteration isn't completely successful. In addition, if you've built up that social capital with your internal representatives and users, there's no real launch that's going to go that badly that that's going to be dire straits. And the other thing I wanted to point out around this lower stakes releases and iterating ongoing is that when you show something to your users that's kind of totally done, they're less likely to give you feedback. Whereas if you show it to them, if you launch iteratively and take it through that process with them, they're more likely to give you that feedback, and you'll get to a better outcome more quickly. The second point is this phrase, which is in the book. It kind of doesn't really make sense when you first read it, but essentially it's to be able to think rather than think to be able to do. So once you kind of come up with the problem area that you're looking to solve for, and if you're not really confident in the type of solution that's going to solve that problem, spend less time thinking about the perfect solution and more time doing to chip away at that uncertainty. So the way to think about it is not really about how much you're expecting to gain from a particular iteration, but how much you're willing to lose in testing whether or not that iteration is going to solve the problem that you're setting out to solve. So when I'm talking about how much you're willing to lose, it's usually in the form of, sprints, user sprints, and That's kind of a good way of thinking about it. And in doing this, you're building up a habit, and it's freeing you from that expectation that as a product manager, you should know everything you need to know before you begin, and you actually get to that answer a lot more effectively. And then the final point I want to make on this topic is we often hear this phrase, fail fast, which is I find kind of annoying. The point is not to fail. The point is to be systematically learning from these iterations. And so it's really important to build in those fast feedback loops and be tracking your adoption measures and other measures of success. So that you can see, what's working, what's not with each iteration. And the other key point is once you've launched an iteration, take what you know now after that launch and adjust your plans accordingly. So don't just say, okay, we've got these 10 iterations and launch each one without taking pause after each to learn from those. So that is the key points that I had about internal product management around being the expert in your problem space, influencing without authority, and growing products with little bets. And I hope that if any of these are goals of your own, then have a think about internal product management if you're not doing it already. Because I've really felt like I've achieved these goals a lot more quickly than I potentially could have. And a last little plug, we're at Go Cardless. It's a fantastic place to work, and we're hiring great product managers. We're looking for great product managers. So check out our careers page or get in contact with me on LinkedIn. It'd be great to talk. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm on mute. What kind of online meetup goes without someone being on mute? Thank you, Ali, for that. It's really inspiring talk. Really enjoyed it, and took some notes on developing product by doing small bets. And I especially liked your point on the fact that these little bets not only allow you to grow the product iteratively, but also to test a lot of different techniques and learn faster. So thanks for that. Some really strong takeaways. Next up, we want to take a look at the poll results to see how does your company manage internal products. So we can see that there is a dedicated PM and development team is the most popular answer, answered by almost 40% of people tonight. Next up, some teams manage both internal and external parts of the product, and I can certainly relate to that. 25% here. Next, it gets picked up ad hoc by various PMs and teams, also 25%. And there's dedicated PM, but no dedicated development team, 8%. And finally, we do not develop products for internal teams at all, which is a really interesting trend. And I wonder how it correlates with the size of organization. Is there any certain size after which we tend to have a development team, or is it basically a combination of all if you're smaller? Really insightful and makes you think. Awesome, thanks. So next up is Joao Carpeiro, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, also known as Curated. He is a senior product manager at Farfetch. He has been a researcher, teacher, developer, and product manager for more than 12 years, having specialized in the past 6 years in product discovery and delivery for B2B products and platforms. He is currently a senior product manager at Farfetch, the global technology platform for luxury fashion, and a freelance mentor/instructor. Without any further ado, I'd like to see more hands coming into the chat just to give a warm welcome to Cravey. And he's going to talk about internal facing products don't have to be bad. Cravey?
Thanks, Alexey. I hope these 15 or 20 minutes will be enough to convince you through my learnings and my personal view that managing internal facing products can indeed be as fun and fulfilling as managing customer-facing products. So those usually are the product company's crown jewels. They look and feel great. And that tends to be a result of an end-to-end process, from personas to canvases to journey maps to lo-fi and hi-fi prototypes. And how about internal-facing products, the ones that we build for our own coworkers? What does so often happen? More often than not, an engineer is given a week to generate a bland back office directly from the database. Sounds familiar to you? Well, if it does, you might also be familiar with the household excuse. It's just internal, right? Yeah, sure, it's just internal. Until it degrades your customer's experience, for example, because there's a customer enabling manual process that becomes slower, ineffective, and more frustrating for both your customers and your coworkers who are trying to serve them. That's one scenario. Or until this frustration drives the users so mad that it becomes a PR nightmare for the company, as we've seen in multiple news pieces about the psychological trauma of social media content moderators. Or until someone screws up big time, like that time a bad UI was one of the ingredients contributing to someone sending this emergency missile threat alert to over 1 million people in Hawaii. So these are examples that show that bad internal products can become customer-facing problems. So they are not so internal anymore, right? The other way around, good internal products, either front-end tools or platforms with APIs, they can help your coworkers achieve great things for your customers. So it's fair to also call them customer-enabling products. What I'll share with you today are my personal lessons learned from 6 years doing product in both customer-facing and customer-enabling products, but is heavily influenced by 2 particular tenures. One was while I worked at Onfido, a global remote identity verification product, where I was for some time the PM for the service platform. So that was the engine, platform, and back office that supported the operational management of the manual bits of the identity verification process. The other tenure that influences these personal lessons is my current role at Farfetch, where I lead the connected retail platform and tools product area, which includes APIs and back office tools for both internal and external users. So I'll start with a contentious question. Is it fair to call internal-facing products products? So this is something that usually comes up when discussing internal product management. So let's ask ourselves a few questions about these products, about these internal-facing products. Aren't they valuable? Don't they have to be usable? Doesn't building and maintaining them have to be feasible, both technologically and financially? So if we have an existing or a potential internal-facing product, we must frame its role by having a clear vision and strategy for it. So this ties well with what Alice said about strategic storytelling. But we can't be naive. The strategy and the vision for our internal-facing product do not exist in a void. We need to establish how this internal-facing product is in turn an ingredient in the business strategy towards the company's vision. If the company has clear goals for a certain time frame and KPIs that indicate progress to that goal, that's already a good start. So on top of this, you can articulate what each product in the company has in terms of KPIs that show progress in contributing to those company goals. These should mirror in some way the vision for that product, and as a result, the mission of the team behind that product for a significant time period. As for shorter time periods, your objectives should be more tangible. And for the sake of argument, let's consider that you use quarterly OKRs for that. Regardless of your product discovery and delivery process, the capabilities coming out of that process need to aim at moving those OKRs forward. In this manner, for each feature you launch or are working on, or for each experiment you run, you should be able to establish your golden thread all the way up to the company's overarching goal. For customer-facing products, this golden thread tends to be more intuitive for most people. So for internal-facing products, it's particularly important to establish it. It's personally one of the first things I ensure it's in place whenever I join, particularly an internal-facing product team. And speaking of teams, if an internal-facing product is a product, it needs to have a product team. And the product team needs to have all the skills needed for them to autonomously pursue their mission. And if we're talking about a tool, this means proper user experience design capabilities. The team also needs as well to be together for long enough and hold its mission for long enough to really make a difference. This is equally true if we're talking about a platform. The user experience of a developer integrating onto a platform is not something trivial. For a platform, I find that having a technical writer in the team, for instance, makes a big difference to this user experience. In my current team, one of our weak spots when I joined was our platform's documentation. It was scarce and it was written understandably from the point of view of those developing the platform, not those developing on the platform, which meant that using the platform required a lot of back and forth between teams. After we launched the user-centric documentation, this back and forth was dramatically reduced, which meant, on the one hand, more focus for the team developing the platform, and on the other hand, more autonomy and efficiency to those who are using the platform. Finally, everyone in the team, regardless of their function, software engineers, QAs, designers, need to think of themselves as product people, thinking outcome over output. Of course, the output needs to be there, but we must build the product together with the customers' and users' needs front and center, not just to build more stuff for the sake of building. You'll hardly ever afford the same people, budget, or time as customer-facing products. There's no illusion on that. So we must be careful where we spend the time and where we spend our effort. And the golden thread that we just saw helps a lot in this regard. As an extreme example, in one of these internal-facing product teams, we once had great impact with something as simple as color coding a number on a dashboard. And everyone was happy about it because what mattered was that we had a positive impact, a significant positive impact on the users in a way that benefited the business. Which leads us to the second part, the users of our internal-facing products. As Ali mentioned, it's usually said that these products have a captive user base. I think that's probably the main reason behind the "it's just internal" excuse to under-resource internal-facing products. And so there's this general feeling that these users don't have an option, that they'll settle for whatever piece of garbage you give them. And as Ali mentioned, turns out that's not true. If your product doesn't fit their needs, they will use something else. And that something else might be hacking your product into something that you didn't imagine, or simply ditching your product or a part of your product in favor of whatever it is within their reach that takes their pain away. And it tends to be an Excel spreadsheet. I don't know why. So these hacks that happen with these products show one obvious thing, that your users are only human. And because they're human, you need to treat them as such. Internal-facing tools are often linked to measuring and improving the performance of people on a certain manual process. And as a product manager, if that's the case, you cannot shun the responsibility of drawing a red line where it's needed between achieving business objectives and treating your users unfairly or unethically with your product to do so. What helps is, of course, meeting them. As we've seen, they tend to be your coworkers, and in normal circumstances, which I know is not the case for most of us right now, it's likely they're one floor away from you, one floor away from your desk. So you really don't have a great excuse to not meet them and witness why and how they're using your product and how often they're cursing while using it. Of course, they might not be there. They might be coworkers in another location or an outsourcing partner. But in that case, it is worth it summoning the help of your manager to make the case for the expense of going to meet them where they are. And it's not just you and your design buddy. Encourage your engineers to join you too. When I joined the service platform team at Onfido, the engineers in our team had only gotten third-hand insights about the users. A few of them joined me and the design folks in spending a week in India by our users' side, and it completely changed our perception. That trip accelerated the ability for us to have an impact on the company that vastly exceeded the cost of the trip. So it definitely is worth it. Of course, times are different right now, so we need to adapt accordingly and find creative ways to be by our users and to know them better. But the bottom line is this: as PMs, we need to be doing whatever we can to listen and observe our users in the environment in which they use our product. And for an internal-facing product, there is really no excuse to not reach out. Besides your users, you might also have more stakeholders, and more than you think, in fact. Let's look at them. High interest stakeholders range from the more powerful ones, such as the top brass of the functions or units directly impacted by your product, in summary, your users' bosses, to the less powerful ones, which are basically your users. The more powerful ones tend to try and manage your product for you, but all your high interest stakeholders are potentially allies. Your users can be champions of your product and influence the way their bosses see your product. And their bosses can, in turn, exert influence in the organization to get your product the attention and resources you need. They're almost as vested in the success of your product as you are. And that's why it may seem like they want to own it and try to give direct orders to the product team. Understanding this opens up a path to manage these stakeholders, which is to get to know them well and protect the team by exposing it to them. Invite your stakeholders to co-create the product with you. Bring them in to join you and the team when you're kicking off a major initiative or refining key backlog items. Because on the one hand, you have to gain from their domain knowledge and experience. And on the other hand, you're showing that you're taking their needs into account. You're showing that you're listening, and you're really listening and taking that into account. So by scratching their itch on your terms, you can avoid them trying to scratch it on their terms alone. This also, of course, builds trust, and that helps protect the team's autonomy. Another source of tension with stakeholders is, of course, priorities, especially if you have multiple stakeholders with competing priorities. Here's what has helped me in the past with this particular aspect, and that you can use too. So first, it's about making prioritization discussions objective. So remember that golden thread. You can use it to elevate your prioritization discussions from a conversation about whether feature A goes before feature B, which ends up being an exchange between disparate arguments, which are not more valid than the other, to discussions about which outcome is more important right now. And because that golden thread leads to measurable arguments, you can use objective data to get to an answer. And data should not be the sole driver of your prioritization decisions, like feeding some mathematical, magical formula to prioritize. Objectively doesn't mean scientific, but data should inform your decisions so that when you inevitably have to say not now to a stakeholder, you can back it up objectively. Stakeholders tend to react well when you can show that you know what you're doing and that you're listening to them and to other stakeholders while giving them clear expectations, even if they're not super happy about them. And then we have the so-called low interest stakeholders, which can sound like a bit of a contradiction. So if they're stakeholders, why aren't they interested? And if they're not interested, then what stake do they hold? So the key here is that we're talking about relative interest. Your CEO is probably the best example of a high power, low interest stakeholder. It's not that they don't care about your product. It's just that they have so many other things that they could care about. So your product, even if it's a revenue generating one, can be of relative low interest for them in the whole grand scheme of things. Another type of low interest stakeholder is someone who competes for budget and headcount with you. They could not care less about your product, but they sure could use one of the engineers you have working on something that's just internal. They don't have the power to grab them, but they can influence those who have it, who are also among your low-interest stakeholders. The two key aspects that matter, in my experience, in dealing with all these low-interest stakeholders are visibility and credibility. With a customer-facing product, well, the product is visible by default with the help of marketing, and credibility shows up directly in the company's top line. With an internal-facing product, you need to work harder for both visibility and credibility. You need to blow your own trumpet, make the work of the team visible far and wide, while also highlighting its impact on the company. So it's never too much to use that golden thread again and objectively show that what you're doing matters to the company and keep any naysayers at bay. To sum it all up, internal-facing products can become externally visible, especially when things go wrong. And when they don't, good internal-facing products can bring great things for your customers, so they should not be managed like second-class citizens, but rather with the same product mindset as customer-facing products. They need a vision and strategy, clearly linking execution to company goals, the golden thread that we've seen. And they need a product team with all the right skills who need to be focused on outcomes over output, because one thing is sure, they're bound to be resourced more frugally than the customer-facing product teams. As for users, don't think of them as hostages of your product. Treat them fairly and ethically, and use your access to them, your easier access to them, to discover and deliver the product they need. And finally, build a collaborative relationship with your stakeholders based on objective and transparent decisions, and especially your high-interest stakeholders, such as your users and their bosses. You need to blow your own trumpet far and wide, give visibility and credibility to your product and to the team. And with these ingredients, you will find that managing internal-facing products can indeed be as fun and fulfilling as managing customer-facing ones. They're really just B2B products, where the two Bs happen to be the same.
Thank you so much, Crazy. Really inspiring talk and some strong takeaways. I took a lot of notes, and I especially like how you reframe the problem of building these products from just naming them differently, which gives a lot of different kind of flavor to it, and makes people think about it differently as well. And especially like how you shifted the paradigm in prioritization from features to outcomes by using the golden thread, and basically trying to align everyone around the final outcome that you want to drive. Thank you for that. And I would like to encourage everyone listening to this talk right now to go to slido.com. You can see it running at the bottom of the screen, and post your questions if you have any, or upload the questions that are already there. And as we go in near our Q&A session, it's going to be really great to have more of them and to select the best ones that are of interest to most people tonight. So thanks again to Crazy. And next up is John Wood. And John is leading the CNN platform on a mission to empower consumer-facing product teams with the technical foundations they need to create a world-class news experience. During that time, John has sought to identify the traits that lead to successful internal platform products, so they may help all product organizations to better realize their product vision and meet the needs of the customers. Please give a big hand to John Woods, who's gonna have a talk on 4 traits of best-in-class internal platform teams.
Cool. Hello, everyone. My name's John, and I'm here today because from my experience, internal platforms have the most influence to break or make the success of a business. And yet they are the team that are most frequently, in some cases, even trodden on, under stressed. I've often found platform teams, I certainly did in my current role in the beginning, to be quite frankly demoralized in the product organization. And that almost got me a bit angry. I thought, well, a product's only going to be as good as its foundations. You can't build a skyscraper on weak foundations, and neither can you realize a really successful product on weak foundations neither. And for that reason, I really, really love my role at CNN, because I get to challenge that assumption every day. And I'm really excited that I get to share some ideas with you that I think are ultimately going to lead to you creating a much stronger platform a much stronger buy-in for the importance of platform in your company. And ultimately, what it will allow the organization to do is grow higher and better serve its customers. And I'm going to cover 4 things today that I think are really, really important mindsets and traits for internal product teams. The first one is to treat internal customers as paying SaaS customers. And the reason why I think this is so important is I've found in internal facing roles more than anything else, it's really easy to lose track of the product fundamentals that you need to create a truly great product. And that comes from the fact internal product management is really odd. We know most of our customers, often on a personal level. We work within a tiny context, which is our company. Although they shouldn't, for efficiency's sake, often leadership can actually direct customers to adopt our product, even if they don't really want it. And we can even be in a very strange situation where we're both the producer and consumer of our product at the same time. And if we adopt the mindset of treating internal customers as paying SaaS customers, it really means that we have to focus on those product fundamentals. And more than anything, what I found that really is it's about putting the agency of decision in your customers' hands about whether they adopt your product or not. And by doing that, there are 3 really big things that you get from it. The first is it massively raises the bar for how good your product has got to be. Because if your customer doesn't like it and they don't want to adopt it, they'll simply build their own platform capability, or they'll seek to bring in a third party that solves that problem instead. So no longer are you just competing with yourself as a team, but you're competing with the external market that's solving similar problems. The second thing, which I think is equally as important, is if there's heavy-handed internal politics that are making teams adopt your platform, you end up in a position where you have customers on your platform who don't really want to be there. And I went through a painful experience of that, where we almost did too much of a good job at convincing leadership that our platform was the best thing ever. And there was a particular customer that probably absorbed 3 times more energy from us because they didn't want to be there. And all of that energy could have been focused on the customers that really wanted and would have got value from our platform. The last one is, I think it's really crucial to have this mindset and provide the agency for decision about adoption to your customers, because it's really fundamental to create the conditions for innovation in an organization. And what that's really about is the fact that teams need to be able to solve customer problems in new and novel ways. And for them to best do that, they need to do it outside of the creative constraints of what the platform can and cannot do today. So we've got the trait and the mindset of treating our internal customers as paying SaaS customers. We put the agency of decision about adoption in their hands, which raises the bar. And in those circumstances, you've got no options but to really focus on the fundamentals of creating a good product. You can interview your customers. You can get data like SLOs on your uptime, throughput, and so forth. You can start doing surveys so they can actually just score you directly. Are you doing a good job or not? Are you solving their problem or not? Is your product valuable or not? And so that's the first one. Treat internal customers as paying SaaS customers. Number 2 is to design data-first platforms. Something that I'm sure a lot of us have heard is the idea that we're now in the 4th industrial revolution, and that the industrial revolution is powered by data. And so what that means for the lifetime of our product management careers is, in most organizations that we work in, data is either going to be central to, or at least an essential facet of, the product value proposition. And so in order to be successful as a company, the platform not only should not ignore data, but it has to be built fundamentally from a data-first mindset. And to be data-first as an internal platform, there's really 2 things you need to do, and they're quite contradictory. The first is that you need to exert control organization-wide about data collection. You need to govern data collection to minimize transformations, reduce the amount of cleaning of data that data scientists and data engineers need to do in order to create valuable prediction and insight from that data. But simultaneously, the organization has to move really fast, which means you have to democratize the creation of new data so that teams can get the answers they want as quick as they need it. And so it creates a really interesting question. How do you exert control? You govern data collection to improve its quality, but you also let go of control, that is, you democratize the creation of new data throughout the organization. And CNN has a slightly novel approach to this, which I'll share with you today. And hopefully it's sort of a thought to get your mind thinking about how you can build your platform data first. So at CNN, each component and some simplistic forms of a component could be a headline, an image, a video. And each component is a self-contained bit of the web. So what that means is that rather than having a sort of standard microservice setup where you might have an edit interface that goes into a different product, which is a database with an API, and then gets picked up by a consumer experience app, actually the database, edit interface, any data integrations and component is all within a self-contained component, which in itself is quite simplistic because it might just hold something like a headline. And when you set up your platform in this way, it exerts a lot of control over the data. The first thing is because when you create a new component, you have to start data first because you have to define a data model and then build everything around that data model. So what it does is it puts all of the consumer-facing engineering teams in a data-first mindset. And the second thing it does is it prevents data being prescribed different meanings across different consumer-facing experiences. So what I mean by that is you've got a database with an API output, and different consumer-facing applications or experience could pick up that same bit of data and prescribe different meaning to it that then when you event that data is going to land in your data warehouse or wherever it's going to go with mismatched meaning. So in that situation, your data science team is going to spend ages cleaning data before it's good enough to use. Whereas by breaking all of the components and the data in those components into small chunks means that by default, all of that duplication gets wiped out. And so hopefully that's building a bit of a picture that what we've done is we've basically created a platform that forces a data-first mindset. It prevents duplication of the meaning of data across our systems, but it doesn't actually require a human bottleneck or check to make that data better. And then that way we can democratize the creation of data. Any team can do it as fast as they want. And we feel pretty confident that the quality of our data is always going to be there by default. So number 2 is design data-first platforms. Number 3 is to design for unimagined future use cases. And what this is really about is to make sure that we avoid the dreaded replatform. I've had maybe the goodwill from a learning experience, but not necessarily the most enjoyable human experience of replatforming on a major scale twice so far. And the reason your replatform is nearly always the same. There's been some major shift in scale, in internal complexity of your customers. The business model has shifted, or there's new horizontal business lines. And the underlying platform essentially had a really baked-in opinion and was built towards very specific use cases of what the company was and the products were at previous time. And when you have to replatform, you're typically wasting years of time where the company can't move forward and it can't serve its customers in a fundamentally better way because you're waiting for the platform to be completely rebuilt in some way. And the most valuable way I found to avoid the horrors of the replatform is that platforms, rather than building for a very specific use case, should really focus on underlying foundational capabilities that have universal application. So a great platform team will be focused on data storage, delivery pipeline, data pipeline, performance. Does the thing load quickly? Infrastructure reliability. Does it support code reuse? Is there a great editorial layer to it? All of these capabilities, it doesn't matter whether you're in banking, e-commerce, publisher, which is where I happen to be at the moment. These capabilities will work. They will drive incredible value in your business. but they don't force any opinion on how the consumer-facing teams should construct their product and what experiences they can create. And this is an example I really like at CNN in the last year that illustrates it well. And it's called Election History. And essentially for the presidential 2020 election, it was an experience that the politics teams created so that users could have an exploratory data visualization to compare present with previous elections, all the way down to the state level. And this is something that on the previous platform, the team, in order to create this, would have had to go completely off platform and build something utterly custom from scratch. Huge waste involved in that. And it just creates debt that will float on into the future. But because the platform's design now is focused on those foundational capabilities that don't have an opinion on what the user experience should be, data storage, performance, editorial interface, all of that we could be used flexibly to create this quite unique experience from a publisher's perspective. So number 3 is design for unimagined use cases. And practically speaking, that's really about building foundational platform capabilities that don't have any opinion on what the user experience should be. Cool. The 4th and final is platform teams lead long-term strategy. This one's a bit of a bold one, but the more I've done it, the more I'm bought into the fact that this is probably one of the most powerful traits of top-class internal platform teams. And the reason why this is so important is at the start of the presentation, I talked a bit how frustrated I feel when I see internal platform teams who are somewhat trodden on, under-resourced, not taken seriously as the sort of the powerhouse that's driving the products and the company forward. And this really sums up to the fact that they're essentially put into reactive mode. They're reacting to business demands. Often they're coming with unrealistic time constraints the team has no real influence over. Stress for the team, bad outcomes for the company. And I found that if platform teams lead long-term strategy and step up and try and do that in their organization, they can break this cycle and get into a proactive state that massively benefits the platform. And so to actually do this, there are 3 things that I think are really important. The first is that, and probably the hardest, is that the platform teams need to step into a role where they believe they need to provide strategic thought leadership at the organizational level. That is, they need to ask the question for our entire business, for our biggest products, what's the greatest opportunity and what are the greatest existential threats for our business and products? And then what they need to do is really figure out what are the underlying platform capabilities that solve for either that greatest opportunity or those existential threats. And when they've got that platform capability in mind and their story is really strong and they know they've got strong buy-in and they've got clarity in their long-term strategy, they can then take that out into the business, interview prospective users, first to sort of test and validate that their strategic thinking and the platform capability they think solves for those problems is really strong, but also essentially in a marketing capacity to start creating the seeds of demand through the business for those platform capabilities. And then with that groundswell of demand, it then becomes extremely easy to translate that into the resources they need to go and build a reference implementation so that the customers of the platform can easily consume it. To put that idea into a real example, CNN have a really huge opportunity. We are the world's largest global news publisher. Simultaneously, we've got a huge existential threat. That is, we are overly reliant on monetization, monetization supported by tracking. Also, you'd often refer to that as third-party ad cookies, and they're being deprecated from the ecosystem. And so about 18 months ago, we saw this down the road, and we realized that really the platform capability that allows us everything to rise up is we need to own user identity, something that the company hadn't done in a meaningful way before. And we took that strategic thought and the solution from a platform point of view that we thought we needed into the company. We went across 7 organizational silos And we tested and then built the demand sufficient that we got executive buy-in and support and the resources we needed and the focus we needed to go make this happen. In the end, it was myself and an engineer. We built what became known as the registration SDK, which packaged up all of the system integration and the complexity and the regulatory needs. And then we're able to put that into a reference implementation that made it blindingly easy for any of the teams to quickly pick up, use, and experiment with that capability. And 18 months after we first got into a proactive mindset, we had the first major realization on top of the identity service, which was in the 2020 US elections. There's about 350 million people in total who came to CNN in that month. There was a My Election experience that was used by a lot of users to understand what is a hugely complex and nuanced political system in the US. And so the number 4, I think perhaps the boldest, but I think most important, is platform teams should seek to lead long-term strategy. Cool. So yeah, I'd be really interested either in the questions in this forum or just one-on-one if you want to reach out on LinkedIn to discuss some of these more. I'm massively passionate about the fact that internal platform teams need a higher place in organizations. And when they do, it will be the best thing the organization ever does. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. That was a worthy closure of tonight's talks on the topic we've been talking about, internal product management. And I loved how you reframed this problem by treating internal customers as paying SaaS customers and the benefit that it brought, particularly not attracting kind of the bad actors, the bad customers. I think this is really insightful. And I'm sure your talk was pretty useful for all the people watching and listening tonight. So we will now move on to the Q&A session. And if you have any questions right now, you're going to have them somewhere along the way. Just go to slido.com. It's on the bottom of the screen, and add them or upload the questions that are already there. So we have a question coming from Nick, and this one is about, I think it's about prioritization of internal versus external features. How to convince leaders to prioritize internal optimization or automation that will allow revenue to scale over short or long-term revenue generating projects. Annie, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is a really interesting question, and it's very, there's no right answer. It's something that I think you have to test and learn. I suppose 2 key thoughts here. The first is, as an internal product manager, you really have 4 areas to play around with. You've got speed of change, so speed of change that your users can make. You've got cost, so cost of teams and cost of the platforms that you run on, and many other costs that factor into that. You've got quality of the change, so the quality for things like usability or performance or things like that. And then you've got reliability, so that's the likelihood that your product your external product is going to deliver on those quality attributes. And so I would focus first on that and kind of figuring out, okay, is my product change going to enable changes across all of those 4 measures, or which one and to what scale? And then you can start painting the strategic story around, if we make this change, we're going to deliver this change to, for example, the speed measure, and then we expect that that's going to have this knock-on effect on our revenue, for example, versus if we didn't do it, this is the gap that we would see. And so rather than kind of skipping straight up to that top level metric, which I think teams often try to do to try and justify this is the revenue that we're going to get, taking that first step is more believable, I think, and more useful as you're trying to tell that story.
Yeah, thanks. Great answer to this question. John, do you have anything to add?
No, I think Ali's response was great, so I won't dilute that with spitting out some random stuff on top.
Thank you. Craig, any thoughts on
Yeah, same here. It's more or less this. It's I think it ends up being easier the more data rich your organization is, because you can really find the data points that show what change you can become, you can bring. But otherwise, even if it's not a data rich organization, you can find the anecdotal evidence that helps you build the case. But it's overall that.
Yeah, great points. And so the next question is somewhat related. So how to convince others of the value of investing in internal products? I guess in an organization where there is no culture of investing in these products at all. So imagine you're in the place where you're not an internal PM and you have to start from scratch and convince everyone why should we do it. So how do you approach it? John, maybe you want to take this one.
Yeah, I think I'll take something out of Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, which is just the basic idea that people will act based on a fear of loss a lot more than benefits. And I think so. I mean, I don't think Zanin will mind me saying that platform is something that has been elevated from the bottom of priority to the top over the last 4 years. And I think really what we're able to do was paint a picture of all of the lost opportunities that they had. That was really about painting a picture of, you realize, for example, you could have had this capability 3 years sooner if you did this, or you realize that this particular product kept going down. The reason why it keeps going down during a breaking news event is because they've gone off platform and actually they should be here. So I think it's, and the other thing I'd say about it as well is, you don't just present it all in the deck. I think a more nuanced and powerful way of doing it is, you understand the story you want to tell about the loss, which will create action, and you're just always looking out for the moments. So it's just spotting it and sending a Slack message to CTO and going, I told you. And so plant the seed, oh yeah, I told you. And over time, people start sort of picking up and going, okay, I think I should start listening now. And it's all those little seeds that add up to a sort of a big story about the fact that the platform's what's going to help everything else raise.
Yeah, great point. And I think, that's a great way to approach building this, persuading the people in the company. It kind of aligns with, in a different way, with LS strategic storytelling, but in a different way where you're highlighting all these missed opportunities. Great stuff. Thank you. Craigie, do you have anything to add?
Not really. I think I was really lucky that I've always landed in organizations that already gave some importance to the internal facing products. But again, you still need to make the case of why you're spending the investment that you have on X versus Y, or the reasoning to have a bigger team or have more time to do something. And again, I think it comes down to showing exactly what's the value of what you're going to solve to justify the investment more than sometimes there's too much of a focus on trying to come up with what's going to be the effort of solving this problem. And I think it works better if we focus on showing what's the value of that problem, what's the cost of that problem, as Ale was saying, and then saying, okay, this, and right sizing, helping the organization right size the investment in that area. And then with what you have, you time box it or resource box it, and you're nimble and lean and do the key laser focused things that have the most impact, and you do it with what you have.
Great points. Eddie, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that they've both John and Kavi have summarized that perfectly. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. All right, so let's move on to the next question. And if you're wondering where these questions are coming from, there is a Slido link at the bottom of the screen. You can go there and add your question if you have. If you just started to watch us, and we'll try to cover it, or just upload the questions that are already there. So next question comes from Anonymous, and the question is about how do you prevent moving to a stage where you manage a group of disparate applications within the domain, nothing strategic, where you just have like random bits and bulbs being managed. I guess how do you create a coherent strategy around those small bits of products that stakeholders are shouting that you should build? How do you kind of fight the people in a way? Credit, do you have any opinion on that?
Yeah, I do. It's hard. It can be hard because it's like gravity. There's some force making things tend that way. But it also depends a lot, because it might be the result of what has been built over the time, and that's also something that if you're in an early stage of those products, you can influence where you're going. But yeah, overall, and I think this goes in line with what I shared in the talk. I think it's about the team, even if they start being assigned a set of tools or platforms, defining themselves as based on the mission that they have, and finding what's the common mission among those tools, and defining themselves and promoting themselves internally as being the people who solve the problem. And I think that prevents two things. It prevents that team becoming just the bucket of anything that's internal or anything that's legacy. And also conversely, and to the point of a question that I saw that's in Slido as well, preventing those tools to become legacy, because that helps demonstrate that if there's a problem, if there's a mission, there's always something that we can show there is to be solved there.
Yeah, thank you. That really resonates with me as well. Hello, John. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think a couple of thoughts here. I think that if you're looking at the product remit that you've got, and you think that it's kind of impossible to create a clear strategy across the whole remit, and actually your team is actually just picking up disparate pieces of an internal ecosystem. I think the first thing to ask is, if in continuing to manage that broad remit, are you going to be able to be an effective team in delivering value? And if you think that the answer to that question is no, then I would go about prioritizing which parts of which products are more important for the business and for the business's goals. And then I would set about creating a strategy focused on those particular high priority product areas, and explicitly saying, yeah, we're not focusing so much on these other product areas, and maybe we'll perform operational maintenance on them, or some kind of investment, but no real uplift there. I think that can kind of take you away from being in quite an unfocused and unmotivating space to something where you're really driving towards something.
Yeah, really great points. Thank you for that. John, do you have anything to add? I'm sorry, you're on mute.
Classic. Cool. Okay, so I think one thing is you can even go bolder sometimes as a platform team, and I think you almost have to make it your mission to deprecate systems even more sometimes than you create them, particularly if you come into sort of a legacy world and it's like spaghetti. Your team's never going to be free. And I've seen a lot of teams that try and avoid the pain, particularly the internal politics, quite frankly, of trying to sort of go with a keep the lights on strategy. Oh, we'll focus on these 3 ones and we'll keep the lights on these 10. And those 10 are just going to drain you. And so I'd really sort of recommend that people actually have a mission at times to deprecate systems more than they create them, and have some focus on doing that. And it's also, when I was in that experience, it was a great chance to sort of build my EQ and sort of figure out all the politics that comes with basically helping people through the loss of their precious system.
Thanks, John. And yeah, that definitely resonates with me. And oftentimes people, including myself, from time to time, think that I can just have some free time but not thinking about specific parts of the product, but they always strike back. They always come trying, wanting some attention and some resource. So yeah, that's really great point. So the next question is, it comes from Emily, and this is a question about build versus buy. How do you go about build versus buy decision in the internal PM world? Ellie, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's like build, buy, and borrow. But I think when you're thinking about building versus buying. There's all those classic trade-offs that you make. But the key question that I like to ask is, what makes us special as a platform team for Go Cardless? That means that we should build this versus, like leveraging an external leader in the field. So take, for example, like your Google and your AWS suites. Why would we build particular, data pipeline capabilities when we could get that out of the box with GCP as an example? So that's kind of asking that question up front, I think is really critical. And if you can't really answer, what makes us special in the way that we wouldn't be able to be supported by that, industry giant, then I think it's important to buy. And then be able to then focus on building and maintaining the particular products in your suite that are, core to your business and that you can't really get elsewhere. If you go down the route of building too often, you just lose that focus and you kind of become unclear of what you're in the business of.
Yeah, great point. And I think as internal PM, it's your job to communicate to other stakeholders all the long-term consequences of going for this short-term build decision, because we can physically build it and it seems feasible, avoiding building this monstrous project that contain everything. John, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's on a similar theme, and by principle, and because it's a principle, it's a guide, it's not a rule, is you build what differentiates in market and you buy the rest, just as a basic frame in order to make good decisions quickly. The types of systems that have come up a lot in my time is this idea of, like, do we build internal, A/B testing capability? Because we look at, a Spotify or a Facebook and we marvel that every release is a test and it's really user friendly and everything else. And, Optimizely sucks because it's, puts a whole load of weight on your page performance. But the reality is you have to ask yourself, are we actually going to build this to a point where it differentiates us? And if the answer is no, then by principle, normally you should buy. That's what's always helped me.
Yeah, really great point. Craig, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, for me, there's kind of two axes for this. One is which stage you are, especially thinking more about internal tools. One is, for instance, it might make more sense to, if you're just still experimenting whether there's something to explore there, you can buy something off the shelf and use to experiment before thinking whether to buy something more complete or build something more complete or more specific. Sorry. And then there's also an axis about what John and Ali were saying about differentiation. I think for me, the three questions I usually ask myself about this is how close it is to your core business. So how much do you want to excel on this? So for instance, if you want to be a product that's well known for their super customer service, then you might want to invest in building your own tailor-made, specific to your customers and your needs, customer management, customer service management software. If you're not, maybe you might use something off the shelf like a Zendesk or of this life. Then this, so it's again about that and about specifics of your industry. It might be something that you might need stuff that you just can't find on anything off the shelf. And then this also leads to like any advantage you may have from holding intellectual property on that. So if it's something that is so close to your core business that you might have an interest on building it, because you might end up having an opportunity to also spin that off as a product of its own.
Thanks, Craig. And I particularly like your point on choosing versus kind of buying more generally solution or building something really specialized to your needs and in the area that you care most about, and therefore gaining some sort of competitive advantage. I'm conscious of time. We probably have time just one more question. So I'm looking at the slide right now, and I think this is something that might be really interesting to look at. So Mark asks, what's the best way to measure value of internal products, if they're enablers for consumer-facing products, if they're like kind of if you're one step away from the final outcome, how do you translate it into your own metrics? How do you convince stakeholders? How do you measure success? John, do you have any opinion on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the context for me is publish a platform for CNN, and there's certain things actually. I mean, I think one of the things is an internal platform, you actually are facing the consumer because the consumer experience is being delivered on your platform. So there are some direct measures that come out of that. So performance is an obvious one. Like, what's your time to first byte? Might be something like Google Web Vitals. Reliability, what's your uptime, what's your throughput, what's your CDN offload, et cetera, et cetera. So I think from a platform point of view, your platform is often facing the consumer. So there's a lot of good measures there. And as a platform, you should be tracking those and you should be really focused on them, as well as the sort of internal customer satisfaction.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate it. Crazy, any thoughts?
Yeah, I've been through this in the past. I think one way of approaching it is looking into what are the success metrics of that customer-facing product, and seeing, okay, what's the contribution of this internal product to that success metric? What slice of it is influence, or what's the factor in the internal product that influences that success metric for the customer-facing product, and use those as your guiding lights.
Yeah, really good points. Ellie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think I emulate what both John and Cuddy have said, and I think what's really important is to actually track your metrics and have that visible. So I think sometimes with internally facing products, it can be hard to get that tracking because you can't add in like a GA or something or like that. And so it's important to go to the effort up front of building that tracking for your product. And then, I agree. Like, I think it's also really useful to be able to track your measures back out to the more customer-facing measures there.
Yeah, good points. And I'm conscious of time. We should be wrapping up, so I'm going to ask just one last question from myself. And if you could give one piece of advice to younger selves about how to succeed being an internal PM, building great internal products, what would it be? And I do want to start. Anyone else? I caught everyone on the spot. Sorry about that.
I think it would be to define the goals that you want to achieve as a product manager, because as an internal product manager, you have, I think you have the capability to test and learn a lot more quickly. So set out your goals and then, go about framing your product space to help you achieve them.
Thanks. Crazy, what would be your advice?
My advice to my younger self, that's a hard one. It's along those lines as well. I can think of times where I could have been more test and learn, and less laying out all the rows and all the ducks in a row before aiming at it. So that would be, for my younger self, that would be it.
Good point. John, what would be yours?
Mine would be focus on your EQ as something you need to learn on all the time, your emotional intelligence. My experience, and this is my personal experience as well, education systems do a great job on IQ. They do a really bad, if not quite honestly, no job at all on EQ. And then you have to go through this painful experience as an adult of realizing that for yourself. And it's something that if you learn, everything gets better. You can just empathize with the users better. You can influence better. It will make you a better husband, better dad at the same time, which is just wicked on top. So I just say to everyone, if you haven't thought about EQ as something that you're dedicating a huge amount of time and attention to, I think it's probably, the best bang for your buck thing you could do from a learning point of view.
Thank you all for your amazing talks tonight and the way which you answered all the questions. Just a quick shameless plug. I work at GoCardless, and GoCardless is hiring. So if you're looking for a job, please go to a careers page. We got hiring with internal PMs. Really appreciate the talks and the answers tonight. And with that, I will hand over to Sean.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic job, everyone who spoke tonight. Thank you so much. And thank you to our audience for your amazing questions and engagement in the YouTube chat. That's it for this month's Product Tank London. Come back to us in March, where there'll be another amazing talk. Keep an eye on the meetup page where it will be announced. Thank you again. Goodbye.
Bye.